Hello, this is the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranston, Director of Communications at the Michigan Department of Transportation. This week, I'm going to be talking about President Biden's long-anticipated infrastructure package. We're supposed to hear more about that as the week progresses. Some things are already rolling out there, and I'm pleased to have with me a repeat guest to the podcast, Lloyd Brown, who's Director of Communications for the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. And I want to hear what he's hearing in terms of speculation and what we might expect. Thank you again, Lloyd, for taking time to talk.
Thanks for having me.
So let's set some background first. We've talked about Infrastructure Week becoming a punchline during the previous administration, even a source of jokes for people not working on transportation issues. Why is there speculation the jokes are over, and do you think something's really going to happen?
Well, a couple of things we've seen so far in the Biden administration is really focused on their discipline. They've been a very disciplined administration to this point, laser focused on the COVID relief package and getting that through, and then all indications were infrastructure was next. When we watched over the last couple of weeks, when there were a couple of mass shootings and the call for action on gun control and increased background checks came up, President Biden last week said there's a time for that and then pivoted to infrastructure. And so it seems to me, looking at the combination of the discipline and his public statements that infrastructure is next, it looks to be that infrastructure is what's next, and the actions so far this week, even this early on a Monday, seem to be pointing in that direction.
We know that Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has been working a lot of rooms using his considerable charms and relationship building skills to speak with Democrats and Republicans. We're hearing a lot about those conversations. Obviously, the Biden administration has a lot riding on his ability to bring people along, and it plays to his strengths because he's a collegial broker and strong communicator. And he's a policy wonk, which helps too because he gets up to speed on these complex issues pretty quickly. Do you think this is putting too much on him?
I do not think it's putting too much on him because it's not just Secretary Pete, as he likes to be called, a takeoff of the Mayor Pete. But he also is soon to have Polly Trottenberg, who was the director of the New York City Department of Transportation. She was with the US DOT during the Obama administration. She's a nationally well-respected and highly considered on both sides of the aisle policy leader. So I think that really what they've done is they've put a really top-notch team in and around Secretary Pete at the US DOT. The new Federal Highway Administration acting administrator, Stephanie Pollack, was most recently the Secretary of Transportation at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And so there's a lot of people with some significant administrative experience and leadership in transportation that are filling up the department. So no, I don't think it's all on him. I also think that the expansive nature of the way that this administration is viewing infrastructure means that while Secretary Pete is certainly carrying a lot of the load for what we would consider more of traditional transportation investments, that there's going to be a lot of effort to advocate for and push other forms of infrastructure investment as well.
You think infrastructure is one of those words that people kind of hear what they want to hear, and for your members, and not that you don't do policy work and advocacy in the transit and rail worlds, the vast majority of your members are consumed with surface transportation and what it means to roads and bridges. Some people hear infrastructure and think it means broadband. Some people think it means, the electric grid. And certainly what President Biden announced on Monday with more offshore wind turbines. That all counts as infrastructure. Where do you think Secretary Pete is on that? Is he as interested in roads and bridges as you might like him to be?
Well, I think that he's signaled that roads and bridges are an important part of the scenario. And I think that if you're looking at any kind of bipartisan agreement on transportation, that you're going to have to bring along people who not only support highways and bridges, but also people who are looking at rail, people who are looking at public transportation. And so this is really a multimodal view of transportation. And I'm not surprised that there are lots of discussions about even going beyond the infrastructure investments to things like why we invest and how we invest in certain areas. So it becomes more of a conversation, or in addition to a conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion and some of those other issues that have really captured our attention as a nation over the last year.
Even as we speak, recording this on Monday afternoon, the secretary is on with Jake Tapper on CNN right now talking about this and their scroll concerns, even some pushback from Democrats about doing too much. You know, some people would say that given the way we've underinvested for so long in our nation's literal foundation, that you can't do too much. What are you hearing around town about that?
We know that the number to eliminate the backlog has been estimated at well over 1.1 trillion just for the interstate system. That's roughly 57 billion every year for the next 20 years that would be needed to just invest in the national interstate highway system to bring it back into a state of good repair. And anybody who's driven cross country, as I did recently over the last few months, can tell you that there are really large sections of the interstate that need some attention and need that kind of investment. If you go at the larger, highway and bridge investment that goes beyond the interstate, over 10 years, you're looking at 756 billion, according to the US DOT's most recent conditions and performance report. So the numbers are quite large. I'm not sure that if you're looking at the needs that you can spend too much. The economic experts might argue that there's a limit to how much you want to invest at any one time, but certainly the needs would say that you need to be investing at a pretty significant level.
It seems to me that, like in Michigan, for instance, those numbers you just quoted, for us, the estimate is $1.5 to $2 billion a year just for state routes to get them back to a 90% condition. And if you could think about this in terms of how you invest now, a lot of states have something like an education trust plan where you can start buying your child's tuition when they're very young and guarantee that they can go to college, 18 years after they're born at the current tuition rates. So you're locking in those things way ahead of time. In Michigan, it's called the Michigan Education Trust, and I know other states have something similar. If you can do something like that with infrastructure where you say, look, we're going to invest now, we don't have to roll it out all at once, but we're going to try to lock in some of these things with some certainty as to the costs, and the contracting community is willing maybe to take that risk because they've got economies of scale and they can figure out ways to make the money go further. If you look at it that way, that you just need, and I know everybody says they want certainty and, sorry, you just can't have it in all things, but this is an area where that could really make a difference and give the contracting world, that confidence that the money's going to be there.
Well, I think what you're seeing here this year from the surface transportation perspective is that we have two things that are moving at the same time. One is this current discussion about infrastructure and injecting money into the economy to pay for infrastructure. But we also have, coming up later this year, the need to reauthorize the surface transportation bill that is the annual authorization to spend out of the Highway Trust Fund for the ongoing maintenance and repair and operations of the national highway system and public transportation and rail. So, there's some that hope that some, in these discussions as you're going along with, talking about infrastructure here this week, that there'll also be some sort of acknowledgement that we're going to be right back here in just a matter of months with the reauthorization of the surface transportation. So we might as well roll it into the current legislation. And I think that it was Chairman Peter DeFazio of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and he's suggesting that that the bill that he wrote last year that got out of committee could be the foundation, or is the foundation, for what's going to be the Moving Forward Act that is going to be the foundation starting point for the legislation that the Biden administration is going to put out later this week. So we'll see how those two things work together.
Well, and you probably saw some comments from Mitch Daniels, who, as governor of Indiana, overlapped, at least for a short time, with Secretary Pete's time as Mayor Pete in South Bend. And Daniels talks about the need to reduce regulatory roadblocks that he says, that often stall major construction projects. And he made it sound so easy, but regulatory roadblocks to some are just protections for animals, plants, and drinking water to others. What are you hearing about that, and whether there's any room for compromise on what they call regulatory roadblocks?
I think that's a really good point. And AASHTO has long been an advocate for streamlining project delivery, but we also understand the need to be preserving and caring for the natural environment and the animals and the wildlife that live in that natural environment. And you'll see that in a lot of states, the most significant investor in environmental programs is the Department of Transportation in that state, because of the types of programs that are intended to be, basically make up for some of the disruptions that are caused by transportation projects. So, we support streamlining. I'm not sure that there's a lot of streamlining that is still in front, but there's always opportunities to look at processes and procedures and see if there's ways of doing it smarter and doing it better. And as long as we stay focused on that, I think that's where most folks are interested in, just making sure that, if we're investing this money in transportation, that we're able to get the money out the door and get it out into the economy and getting it doing the work it was intended to do as quickly as possible.
And there's also talk about bringing back earmarks, and in fact, the House GOP conference voted earlier this month to do that. But then they also talked about some transparency rules, and I've read that some lobbyists say that that'll water things down too much to really allow earmarks to be reinstated. What are you hearing on that front?
People have said for a long time that when the earmarks were taken away by the Republican Congress back in, I think, 2008 or 2010, but well over a decade ago, that the ability to get to pay for and gain large support for transportation bills sort of evaporated. But the reality is that the earmarks were not the panacea, and I'm not sure that they are in this scenario either. I do think that being able to go home to a district and say to your constituents that there was movement in favor of a particular project or program that is popular in that district will help somebody get reelected, and that's just political common sense. But I'm not sure that that's going to be the thing that is going to put this infrastructure investment program over the top either way.
So it's really another word like roadblocks, right? That sounds innocuous enough. Earmarks, like, of course you would go through and earmark certain things for specific uses, but to other people that just sounds like pork, and it's not a good thing. So,
well, and it sounds as if, from my understanding, that there are some guardrails, to coin a transportation phrase, on their agreement with the earmarks that would make it more transparent. And from our perspective, the departments of transportation, we'd like to engage with the members of Congress to make sure that as they're identifying projects, that they're within the state investment program, that there's funding to go along with the federal funding, so that federal dollars don't get hung up and sort of held hostage and aren't able to move forward because there's not a state match. So there's some other criteria that we advocate as well to go along with the earmarks, but that's all process. Really, the intent behind it is to try and increase interest and support for investing in transportation. We support that wholeheartedly.
Well, the president during his campaign, talked about investments that would create 5 million new jobs. I know those job figures always get bandied about when it comes to transportation, whether you're talking about direct or indirect jobs, you're talking about actually supporting existing jobs. He actually said creating new jobs, but I guess, I hate to be the skeptic here, but whenever I hear and read that this is at least something that there's bipartisan support for, I think that that's really misframing the issue, because of course there's bipartisan support for having good roads and bridges, but I've never seen any bipartisan support for how to pay for them. So, what's your gut tell you about this and where the conversation goes and whether something truly big can happen?
Well, that's the bottom line question for sure, is what's the number and what's the pay for? And it could be a combination of any number of things to be negotiated out. But what we're seeing is that the Democrats are not in 100% unity, that this is that spending in the trillions of dollars for infrastructure on a broad infrastructure sort of writ large is what we need to be doing right now, because of what it potentially could do to the economy and with inflation and different things of that nature. So if you talk just about investment in bridges and roads and electrical systems and water systems and some of these hard infrastructure systems, I think you do get a lot of support from the public. You also get a lot of support from Congress. But then sitting down and paying for it, it's the same if you're a homeowner and you're faced with the reality that your roof needs to be repaired. You can see it, you look at it, there's a leak coming through in the kitchen, but somebody's got to write that check, and that hurts every time. So how you're going to come up with the money to write that check is the biggest question. And I'm not sure that we've got a complete answer, and I think that's going to be where a lot of the conversation goes in the next couple of weeks.
So that's an analogy, metaphor that you hear a lot, comparing it to your home and your roof. And I guess I always wonder how it is that people think, well, of course I'm going to do what I have to do because I have to preserve my home. Why don't we, the collective we, feel like, roads and bridges are ours? How are we able to compartmentalize that in our minds that, well, that's not my problem? I know that's probably a psychological question.
It is. And I remember, I don't know, it's been probably 8 years ago now. I was in Wyoming and I was for a meeting, and I heard the governor of Wyoming talking to a group of transportation leaders. And he said, the most conservative, principled thing to do is to invest in our infrastructure system, to maintain it and make sure that we're keeping it in a state of good repair. And his point was that, it makes sound fiscal sense that you've invested significant amounts of money. Let's maintain this resource at its highest and best use so that it can last for as long as possible. And that's a conservative principle. But it's also common sense, and it's something that goes far beyond political party. It just, the way that he phrased it has always stuck with me, that it is the right way to do it, is to make sure that you're maintaining the system and keeping it in good working order so it'll last as long as it possibly can.
And that's why, chambers of commerce all over the country and organizations like them that traditionally are the advocates for business and the business world agree with that. That's why they feel that way. So, he's not alone in believing that. Thanks, as always, for your time. It will be really interesting to watch how this plays out and to see if, a few months from now, we're talking about some success with a major plan.
Well, Jeff, it's actually really nice to be in a real infrastructure week for a change, and to see what that feels like and not really have it be the butt of a joke.
Yeah, I agree. And people should also know that you're speaking to me with your Washington Nationals gear on, even though you're a lifelong Dodgers fan. You've kind of adopted a second team since you live in D.C., and I certainly don't blame you for that.
They're a fun team. Looking forward to the start of the season. This is the best time of year. We've got two things. We got Infrastructure Week and the start of Major League Baseball. So
there you go. All right. Thanks, Lloyd.
Take care, Jeff.
Thank you again for listening to this week's edition of the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I would like to thank Randy Dubler and Corey Peaty for engineering this week's podcast. To subscribe to show notes and more, go to Apple Podcasts and search for Talking Michigan Transportation.